Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a kitchen unlike any you've ever known. No fridge, no apron, no knobs to twist, just clay, ash, heat, and time. This is the soft, smoky, dust speckled world of ancient Mesopotamian bread making. Long before bakeries had glass fronts and sourdough starters had Instagram accounts. The first loaves were shaped with reverence and baked in silence. But let's be honest. If you think you're going to make it through an entire Mesopotamian morning without accidentally inhaling a cloud of barley flour and nodding off before the first loaf is even shaped, you probably won't. And that's exactly what we're hoping for. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive before the sun has fully lifted its head above the horizon. The sky is still a soft slate gray, and the air smells faintly of damp earth, dried reeds, and the last smoky sighs of a nighttime fire. You're standing in a small courtyard, mud brick walls pressed in close, tall enough to hold back the breeze, low enough to let the light spill in when it arrives. This is not a grand temple kitchen or a royal bakery. It's more ordinary than that, more sacred too, in its own way. The floor is packed dirt, swept smooth. There are no counters, no shelves, just low benches and shallow stone pits. Their interiors blackened from years of open fire. Clay jars are tucked into corners. A narrow wooden paddle leans against the wall. Ash from yesterday's baking rests in tatty mounds along the outer ring of the hearth. In the center, a small fire pit lies quiet, coals still warm beneath a layer of thin ash. A few flat river stones have been arranged around its edge, their surfaces scarred by years of glowing bread crusts. There's no clock here. Time is measured by the color of the sky, the warmth of the coals, the weight of the dough, and that dough has not yet been made. In ancient Mesopotamia, roughly modern-day Iraq, over 4,000 years ago, bread was not merely foods. It was a rhythm, a ceremony, a currency, a link between the mortal and divine. And like most sacred things, it began in silence. You squat beside the hearth and run your hand over one of the stones. It's warm, but not hot, ready. A woman nearby stirs from her crouch. She's older, wrapped in layers of linen and wool. Her hands cracked and dusted with flour from the day before. She doesn't greet you with words, just a nod, a flick of the eyes toward a pile of emmer wheat and barley husks laid out on a shallow reed tray. Grinding begins not with machines, but with motion. She reaches for a heavy stone, a saddle quern, smooth in the middle from decades of repetition, and places a mound of emmer on its lower surface. Then she starts to push another stone over it, back and forth, not quickly, not forcefully, just insistently. The sound is low, steady, a soft rasp, like cloth being folded again and again. The flour gathers in the hollowed dip. You crouch beside her and try it for yourself. The stone is heavier than it looks. Your arms tire quickly. She smiles, hands you a smooth piece of leather to wrap around your knuckles. You try again. In this courtyard, flour doesn't just arrive, it's earned, and it's never sifted to perfection. Tiny flecks of husk remain, bits of grit, maybe even a stray seed. Bread in Mesopotamia was coarse, dense. It didn't melt, it chewed back. While you grind, the older woman moves toward the ash pit and uncovers a bundle wrapped in linen. Inside, a cracked, wide bowl of clay with something sticky, slightly sour, still clinging to its sides. This is yesterday's dough, left overnight to capture the air's wild yeasts. There's no thermometer, no feeding schedule. Fermentation here is by feel, by scent, by hope. Mainstream archaeological studies confirm that the Mesopotamians had no true understanding of microbial leavening, but they understood its results. They knew that dough left sitting near warmth would rise, that yesterday's leftovers gave today's bread a better texture. Some scholars call this instinctual sourdough, others call it luck, but the bakers here, they call it survival. A curious detail from a dig near Nippur revealed dozens of these fermentation bowls, each with unique markings, finger swirls, thumbprints, etched symbols. Some believe each household had its own mother dough, passed down, protected, whispered to, as you finish your grinding. You mix the flour with water from a leather skin pouch and a pinch of salt. The water is warm from the sun. You stir slowly, kneading the sticky mass with both hands, your palms pressing, folding, shaping. The dough clings, then yields. It smells slightly of earth and vinegar, alive. You shape your first loaf, not a towering dome, just a squat disc, flattened slightly at the edges. The older woman nods. You're doing fine. There's some scholarly debate about the shapes of ancient Mesopotamian loaves. Some tablets depict rounded cakes, others mention flat, wide discs. A few rare fragments even describe layered breads, folded with oils or honey. But in this courtyard, the loaves are humble, functional, fit to rest on a stone and absorb heat slowly. You place your disc on a river stone beside the embers. It sizzles faintly. You press the edges down gently with your fingers to ensure it cooks evenly. The heat creeps in from below, browning the base while the top begins to rise, just a little. You sit back on your heels and watch. The world smells like barley and ash and the anticipation of food. No one speaks. It's not needed, and as the first crust begins to form, you realize baking here isn't an act. It's a conversation, a slow, warm, flour-dusted exchange between fire and grain, hands and heat, silence and nourishment. And you, at last, are listening. The loaf you placed on the stone has begun to harden around the edges. Its pale surface is speckled now with golden patches, bubbles rising unevenly like thoughts you haven't finished forming. You don't flip it, not yet. The woman beside you presses her finger gently into its edge and gives a brief nod. Her eyes don't change, but her hands do. They reach for another ball of dough with the same calm precision you've seen throughout the courtyard. She shapes it without looking. You join her again at the flour station. The grinding stone is warm now from use, and your hands carry the flour's faint dust deep into the creases of your knuckles. The rhythm of this movement is different from earlier, slower, more careful. These loaves will not be eaten by the people of this household. They're not for breakfast. They're for the gods. The second dough is finer. You notice the woman sifted this one longer, grinding it again after the first pass. She adds a drizzle of honey. Not much, just enough to scent the bowl and a dark, oily syrup made from dates that smells like cooked sunlight. In ancient Mesopotamia, bread wasn't just daily fare, it was divine currency. At the temples of Ur and Nippur, records carved into clay tell of priests and workers assigned solely to the production of sacred bread, hundreds of loaves, baked each day not for people, but for statues of gods, placed on altars, left overnight, removed and burned, or sometimes consumed by temple staff. The details vary, but the idea remains if you wanted the gods to listen, you had to feed them first. This is where the line between bread and belief blurs. You follow the woman to a low table at the edge of the courtyard. On it sits a set of small reed molds. Each one bears a simple design, cross-hatched lines, a crescent, a circle divided into quadrants. She presses the shaped dough gently into the mold and lifts it out. The mark remains a seal of intention. Historians debate the purpose of these markings. Some argue they identified the type of offering. Others believe they indicated the god for whom it was intended. A few fringe scholars, particularly those who study ritual baking practices, suggest they were part of a code understood only by priests and bakers, not writing exactly, but prayer pressed into dough. You're given a mold, a circle, cracked at one edge. You roll your dough, press it in. The mark is faint, but legible. You place the loaf on a woven mat beside the others and feel something shift. You've gone from helping to participating as the sacred loaves rest, fermenting quietly. The older woman returns to the hearth. The first loaf, the one you made, is ready to flip. She hands you a flat piece of clay, smooth-edged, almost paddle-shaped, no handle, just enough surface to slip beneath the dough. You lift gently. The loaf peels off the stone, just barely, and you turn it. The underside is darker than you expected, crisp, marked with the stone's uneven surface. The top begins to bake now, exposed to the rising heat of the coals. You set the tool down. You wait. A breeze stirs the ash in the pit, somewhere beyond the courtyard. A voice calls out, not words, just a short tone, rising and falling like a bird note. A donkey brays. A door creaks open. A clay jar clinks shut. But here, or within the bounds of this little courtyard, the noise never intrudes. The silence isn't strict. It's simply held, like dough in a bowl, allowed to rise. You sit again beside the sacred loaves, which have now puffed slightly, their oils gleaming in the fading dawn light. They will be baked in a different oven, one behind the house, closed and domed, shaped like a beehive. The tanner. The woman gestures toward it, and two younger girls lift the tray of unbaked offerings, balancing it on a wide cloth spread across their arms. They walk slowly, carefully. Their sandals barely scuff the earth. You follow at a distance. The tanner is hot already, glowing faintly at its base where the fire burns low and wide. The girls do not speak. One opens a clay lid. The other passes the loaves one by one. They aren't placed on trays or pans. They're pressed directly onto the inner wall of the oven, dough meeting clay. A hiss, a shiver, and then silence. This method, baking on the oven wall, is not a guess. It's recorded in temple documents, described on tablets, recreated in experimental archaeology digs across the world. Bread baked in this way emerges curved and smoky, the side against the clay blistered and crisp, the other soft and aromatic. it takes only minutes. And yet, the process is patient, reverent. No one crowds the oven, no one chats. You sit beside the fire, warming your hands, and feel a weight settle in your chest that has nothing to do with hunger. This bread will not be tasted, but it will be noticed. It will rise in more than heat. Some historians believe that loaves left on temple altars were eventually eaten by priests. Others argue they were returned to the earth, burned, buried, or left for the animals. But regardless of the final step, the intent remained constant nourishment as dialogue, bread as speech, dough as petition. The first loaf falls from the oven wall with a soft thump. A girl catches it in a folded cloth, presses her nose to it briefly, then wraps it. The rest follow. Within minutes, the basket is full, not heavy, but complete. The older woman returns, accepts the basket, and walks past you with slow, deliberate steps. You watch her go, knowing she will leave the loaves somewhere you're not invited to follow. And that's all right. You've already tasted something else. The sun has finally climbed above the mud brick rooftops, its light spilling gently over the courtyard's eastern wall, illuminating the low bench where you now sit, hands faintly dusted with flour, palms warm from the fire. The sacred loaves are gone, carried away into a place you were not asked to follow. But the work of the kitchen continues. A different dough is being mixed now, thicker, grainier, made from coarsely ground barley and just enough water to bind it. The texture is rough beneath your fingers, as though the dough remembers the field it came from. A younger woman kneels beside you. She speaks to no one, but her hands are efficient. She pinches off lumps of dough, rolls them quickly, and flattens them into discs no wider than her palm. These will not go to a god or a noble. These are the daily loaves in ancient Mesopotamia. Bread came in many forms. Some were for rituals, others for records, but most were for hunger, eaten by children and herders, scribes and shepherds, soldiers and servants, the staple of life, consumed by everyone, regardless of wealth. In some cities, nearly 3/4 of daily calories came from bread, and still, it was rarely the same loaf twice. You watch as she takes the flattened discs and stacks them between leaves of papyrus, a trick to prevent them sticking. These will be cooked directly on the stones. No tanner, no mold, no embellishment, just fire and flour, leaning toward each other in the silence of a morning kitchen. The elder woman returns now, her hands empty, her face unreadable. She stoops beside the hearth, pushes aside the previous coals, and lays fresh ones, thin, black, in whispering heat. She places the papyrus-wrapped loaves onto the cleaned stones, one by one, then covers them with a curved pot, blackened from years of use. This makeshift dome traps the heat, holding the fire's breath close to the dough. You notice how little she says, how easily the others mirror her movements. This kitchen has no recipes written down, no measured spoons, no raised voices. It teaches through quiet repetition, passed by gesture and glance. One mainstream source, the Yale Babylonian Collection, contains cuneiform tablets with some of the oldest known food instructions, including bread-related texts. But these are sparse, lacking ingredients or quantities, often focused more on ritual significance than domestic procedure. Scholars agree the real recipes lived in kitchens like this one, in hands, in rhythm, in silence. You try shaping another loaf. Your hands remember more than you thought. The motion has settled into your wrists like a second breath. You press, fold, shape. The woman beside you doesn't correct you. She simply nods, adjusts her own dough to match yours. Teaching without teaching. There's a small jar nearby, glazed in faded blue, that contains a thick paste made from crushed sesame and wild herbs. The young woman dips her fingers into it and smears a bit onto the surface of one of the loaves. Not decoration, just depth. Another layer of warmth for the day ahead. Fringe evidence from unearthed household sites near Mari and Sipper shows traces of onion, cumin, and date residue in domestic ovens. This suggests Mesopotamian bread wasn't always plain. It absorbed the landscape seeds, herbs, fruits, even ground legumes. Every household had its flavor, every fire its accent. You sit back, letting the heat touch your face, as the covered loaves begin to release a faint aroma, nutty, grassy, laced with smoke. Nothing overpowering, nothing spiced or sugared, but unmistakable. This is the smell of early cities, of waking fields, of humans teaching grain to bend near the far wall. A boy begins arranging firewood, carefully stacking it beside a clay bin half filled with flour. You notice he places each stick parallel to the next, aligning the edges. He's not rushing, not careless. He works as if the stacking itself were part of the baking. And maybe it is. You ask yourself how much of this is ritual, how much necessity. In Mesopotamian kitchens, it's hard to tell. The lines blur. A hand resting over dough could be prayer. A brush of flour on the forehead, a cooling gesture, or a blessing. And then there's the debate. Of course, scholars still argue whether ancient Mesopotamian bread making was mostly communal or private. Some tablets list rations distributed from large ovens, implying centralized baking. Others point to smaller domestic hearths like this one, where bread was shaped by individual hands. Likely, both were true. Cities needed bulk, homes needed soul. The elder woman lifts the pot. A wisp of steam escapes, curling toward the sky before vanishing into the morning heat. She removes the loaves one by one. Their undersides are crisp, dotted with tiny charred seeds. Their tops are pale, still warm and slightly damp. You reach for one. She lets you. You hold it in your palm. The crust soft, the center still yielding. You break it open, releasing steam. It smells of barley and breath. You take a bite. It's chewy, rough, honest. It tastes like something that existed before names. No butter, no glaze, just grain, crushed and coaxed into sustenance. Around you, no one eats yet. The loaves are set aside, cooling. Some will be saved. Some will be delivered to other homes. A few, perhaps, traded for onions or wool or salt. One is handed to a boy. He takes it, tears off a piece, and disappears behind the house. His footsteps are light, and here, in the middle of it all, sits the hearth. Not a grand oven, not a stage, just stones and ash and memory. Everything comes back to it. You press your hands together, brushing off flour and heat, and look up. The sky is bright now, and the quiet remains. The courtyard has shifted with the light. Shadows have pulled back into corners, revealing the full sprawl of the kitchen space. What looked like walls before are now passages. What seemed closed off opens. As the day begins in full, The work does not pause. It simply pivots. You follow the elder woman as she steps beyond the courtyard, through a low arch where clay bricks are streaked with soot. The ground underfoot changes, more compacted, more worn, and the air smells different. Drier, more baked. This is where the ovens live, not the open hearthstones or the domed tanner, but something deeper. These are semi-subterranean ovens, their mouths blackened, their rims worn smooth. Fire no longer dances in them, only slow heat remains, trapped in brick and stone, radiating upward with the patience of a desert afternoon. She kneels beside the largest one, opens a thick clay lid, and peers inside. You do too, and there it is, a row of loaves, half buried in ash, faintly smoking. These were placed long before you arrived, perhaps even the night before. They've spent hours with the fire, not above it, but beside it, not shaped into discs, but molded like elongated teardrops, scored with parallel cuts down the center. This is ash bread, smoke bread, bread that knows waiting. There's something reverent about the way she pulls them free. She doesn't rush. She uses a narrow wooden tool, somewhere between a paddle and a rake, to draw the loaves gently from their warm hiding place. The crust crackles. The ash clings. Each one is shaken, slowly, and then set in a reed basket, lined with cloth. You brush your fingers against the crust of one. It's hard, dense, but when you press, it yields slightly. These loaves weren't made to impress. They were made to endure. Bread in ancient Mesopotamia had to last. Markets weren't daily. Storage was precious. And so many of the region's loaves were baked in ways designed not for beauty, but for time. Long baking in embers, coarse crusts to seal in moisture, dry interiors that could be revived with oil or water. Mainstream scholars describe Mesopotamian bread as functional, hearty and plain, meant to sustain laborers and households for several days. But dig into the details, and there's nuance. Bread was a response to life's uncertainties. Drought, war, delays at the temple, famine at the edge of the horizon. It had to hold. You lift one of the cooled loaves. It's heavier than expected, almost a weapon. But when you press it to your face, it's still warm, still carrying yesterday's fire. The elder woman sets it aside. Her work here is done, for now. You trail her back through the arch into a different corner of the kitchen. Here, another woman is working over a flat clay slabs positioned on bricks above a small pit fire. She's preparing a kind of batter, thin, almost runny, made from finely ground wheat and water. She uses a half-gourd to ladle it onto the surface, tilting the slab to spread it in a wide circle. It cooks fast. This is a different kind of bread, closer to a crepe than a loaf. Flexible, pale, cooked in less than a minute. She peels it up, folds it once, sets it on a reed tray. You're watching one of the oldest forms of flatbread, possibly the oldest. There are debates among historians as to what qualifies as bread. Does it need yeast? Must it rise? Is it defined by grain or by texture? These questions feel irrelevant here. This batter, this heat, this motion, it's bread because someone eats it, because it carries the essence of flour and fire. A fringe find in the ruins of an administrative district near Sipper included remnants of just such a flatbread, folded carefully and placed in a small lidded bowl. Next to it, a stylus and an unbaked tablet. Was it lunch? Was it an offering? No one knows. But the suggestion is there, bread accompanied thought. As this woman works, another arrives, carrying a small pot of soft cheese, crumbly and sharp smelling. She breaks a piece of flatbread, scoops some cheese, eats silently. You're handed a piece. The bread tears easily. It's barely thicker than cloth, but it tastes alive, nutty, slightly charred, sour at the edges from the grain. You chew slowly. The noise of the outside world filters in, barely. A passing cart, distant voices. Nothing interrupts, nothing hurries, because the kitchen itself holds its own time. Each space, you realize now, carries a rhythm. The hearth is slow and circular. The courtyard, communal. The tanner, vertical and precise. This slab is quick, responsive, a dance, and each type of bread matches its fire. There's something quietly miraculous about that. A child wanders in, sits by the wall, and begins collecting crumbs into a small pile. She doesn't eat them. She's saving them. Perhaps for animals, perhaps for superstition. In some Mesopotamian texts, crumbs were offerings, not just waste, dropped for spirits, for the forgotten, for the silence between meals. The slab baker hands her a piece of torn bread. The girl accepts it without speaking, just a nod. You sit back, and for the first time all morning, you feel full, not from what you've eaten, but from what you've learned to notice. The way dough settles when it's rested long enough. The way ash carries heat better than flame. The way silence is never emptiness. It's attention, worn smooth like a grinding stone. The air is warmer now, the light more direct. The loaves are cooling, the batter running low, and still. No one seems to count the hours. Here, time is not measured by minutes. It's measured by loaves. The courtyard's rhythm is no longer a slow build. By mid-morning, it's a hum, low, constant, unwavering. Loaves come and go. Smoke drifts lazily upward, catching the edge of the sun. Bread cools in baskets, rests in clay pots, travels in quiet hands through narrow alleys and across reed mats. You find yourself seated beside a low stone table now, its surface lightly dusted with flour and ash. Atop it lies a collection of tools, not dramatic in appearance, but essential in their presence. A small paddle made from palm wood, its edge blackened and smooth. A flat shard of riverstone, a sliver of bone, honed to a dull point. A fragment of fired clay that once belonged to a larger mold, all arranged with care, but not reverence. These are working things, not heirlooms, not sacred, and yet they are clearly treated as more than scraps. The youngest apprentice in the kitchen, hardly more than a child, sits opposite you, her hands wrapped around a reed brush. She uses it to sweep flour from the tabletop in short, efficient strokes. She doesn't speak. No one here speaks unless there's something worth saying. These tools have a rhythm of their own. The paddle is used to place loaves gently into the base of the tanner, to rescue them before they overbake. The stone is for flattening dough, not with pressure, but with coaxing. The bone sliver etches marks, not letters, not decoration, just soft scores in the dough that help it bake evenly, that keep it honest. One of the elder bakers leans over now, selecting the clay shard. She uses it to lift a thin sheet of batter bread from the cooking slab. She does this without looking, without hesitation. The tool fits her hand as though her hand was shaped to hold it. In Mesopotamian kitchens, There was no separation between tool and task. Implements were often made from what was available: fired potsherds, reed stems, shaped stones, even broken bits of sculpture. The luxury was not in what the tool was made from, but how long it had been used. Archaeological sites in Uruk and Eridu have turned up hundreds of such kitchen fragments. They're rarely catalogued, often dismissed as refuse, but some carry faint scorches, repeated patterns of wear, grooves rubbed smooth by calloused fingers, signs that they were not broken, only finished. You're invited to use the paddle now. A small disc of dough has been placed on a folded cloth beside you. It's soft, dimpled. You reach for the paddle, but you hesitate. The edge is worn almost to a curve, and you can feel where countless hands have pressed into its surface. The apprentice nods slightly. Go on. You slip the paddle beneath the dough and place it, carefully, into the low hearth. The dough rests on the warm brick like it's been here before, like it remembers the stone. There's an odd kind of intimacy to the process. You're not just baking, you're borrowing gestures. Hands that came before you figured this out centuries ago. They learned where to press, when to flip, how much heat is too much. You're just catching up. And yet, somehow, it still works. There's a quiet moment as you kneel beside the fire, eyes on the dough. The edge raises first, lifting into a soft bubble. The crust forms slowly, browning along lines you didn't draw. You use the paddle again, more confident this time. The dough turns, cooks, finishes. You've made something, not something perfect, not something impressive, but something that will feed. You offer it to the apprentice. She tears it in half and hands a piece back. A quiet smile, not wide, but unmistakable, passes between you. A curious fragment from a mid-3rd millennium BCE letter contains a line that has puzzled scholars for years. It reads, "The tool listens more than the hand." Interpretations vary. Some say it's metaphor, reminding the baker to trust the process. Others believe it refers to how a tool teaches its user through feedback, tension or resistance, temperature. And still others believe it's literal, that the tool, passed from hand to hand, carries memory, that it knows what it's for, even if the baker forgets. This tool has listened, and now, so have you. Another baker enters the space now, carrying a reed tray covered in drying cloths. She removes them one by one, revealing small loaves, each marked with a different symbol: a sunburst, a zigzag, a crescent. These are for delivery. Bread in Mesopotamia wasn't just food, it was proof of work done, of promises kept, of obligations met. And so each loaf bore a mark, pressed by a tool not unlike a seal or stamp. It told the scribe who baked it, told the patron how many, told the gods who it was for. The apprentice hands you one of these stamps. It's carved from wood, round as a coin, with a symbol in the center that resembles a stalk of barley. You press it gently into a fresh round of dough, careful not to crush it. The mark holds, no words spoken, no ceremony, just one more loaf. Now speaking a quiet truth about who made it, and when, and where, around you. The kitchen continues its hum. Tools return to their resting places. Cloths are folded. Ash is swept. But no one looks hurried. No one seems eager to finish. The work itself is its own reward. You set the stamp down. It's warm now, from your hand, and it no longer feels like someone else's. Outside the kitchen walls, The world has grown louder. Merchants call to one another in the street. A water jar clinks against the stone edge of a courtyard basin. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once, then again. But inside the kitchen, inside the quiet geometry of clay, fire, and flour, none of that seems to enter. The bread has changed again. You're in the corner of a side room now, its walls thick with years of soot, its only light coming from a small opening near the roof. It's cooler here, shaded, and the air carries a subtle tang, damp grain, soft fermentation, and something richer. You spot it immediately, a wide ceramic pot near the back wall, its rim dusted with flour, its interior dark and thick and bubbling. The starter. This is the living portion of the bread, the part that's neither seed nor fire, but something in between. Not exactly yeast, not in the way we understand it now, but a culture of wild fermentation that the women of this kitchen tend to as if it were a child. It rests near warmth. It is stirred gently, fed irregularly, but with care. It is observed, never spoken to, not out of fear, out of respect. You kneel beside it. The smell is sharp, tart, and warm, with a hint of damp straw. You dip a finger and touch it lightly. It's elastic. It resists slightly before yielding, alive, in a way no other ingredient has been. The elder woman enters, carrying a bowl of flour. She pours some into the pot, no measuring, just feel. She stirs with a short wooden paddle, scraping the walls clean in slow arcs. She doesn't look at the mixture. She watches the paddle, the way it drags, the way it catches. That's how she knows. Fermentation was never named in Mesopotamia, not in any tablet we've yet found, but the bakers knew it. They understood that leaving dough too long in the heat made it sour, and that sourness was useful, that it gave the bread a different chew, a different weight, a longer life. Mainstream scholars often point to leavened bread in Mesopotamia as a mystery. The Sumerian word for risen is hard to isolate. The Akkadian term for fermented is vague, yet in clay tablets from temple accounts, distinctions are made between flatbread and swollen bread. One is made quickly, the other waits, and in this room, you are waiting. You sit in silence as the elder adds water, stirs, then covers the pot with a worn cloth. It will rest now, near the warmth of the wall. It will be used again tomorrow, or the next day, or perhaps not at all. There's a fringe theory, mentioned only briefly in niche studies, that suggests some households named their starters, not officially, not ritually, but affectionately, like a friend, a helper, a thing that kept the family fed even when fields failed or temples closed. The theory is unconfirmed. Of course, but watching the way the woman touches the side of the pot, just once, with the back of her fingers, you start to believe it. You're handed a fresh bowl now. Inside, a portion of the starter has already been scooped and folded into flour. The mixing begins again, not a public act, not a performance, just repetition. Fold, press, turn, fold, press, turn. This dough is softer than the earlier ones, looser, not made for open flame or flat stone. It's meant for a slow oven, for a resting place. It will rise, not high, but enough. While you knead, the youngest apprentice enters with a bundle of herbs tied with twine, not for seasoning, for air. She lays them near the window, where the light catches the green. You recognize them now: coriander, mint, perhaps crushed garlic leaves. Their scent mingles with the dough and gives the room something sharper. Not unwelcome, just honest. Bread absorbs the room it's made in. That's what you're learning now. It carries not just ingredients, but temperature, rhythm, interruption. If someone shouts outside, the dough flinches. If the fire falters, the texture changes. If a child coughs near the hearth, someone blesses the batch. You set your bowl down. The dough is ready. It rests now under a linen cloth. Warmth will lift it. Nothing else. One of the other bakers beckons you forward. She kneels beside a deep clay basin with a stone lid resting on top. Inside, a sour, wet mixture bubbling softly. This isn't bread yet. It's beer mash. But the scent is similar. Barley, sweetness, ferment. You hadn't realized how close the two processes were. In fact, across ancient Mesopotamia, bread and beer were twin crafts, often made from the same grains, often in the same rooms. Some evidence even suggests that stale bread was crumbled into water to begin the beer process, and that beer, thick and porridge-like, was sometimes baked into cakes for later. It's all one rhythm, one vocabulary, grain, time, fire, breath. You return to your resting dough. It has puffed, slightly. Nothing dramatic, just a hint of lightness. You shape it into a small round and set it in a stone bowl rubbed with oil. A cloth goes over the top. It will rise again, slowly. This loaf will not be eaten today, and still, it is enough. It exists. It will become. The quiet of the room deepens, not from fatigue, but from fullness. Every bowl is busy. Every hand has flour on it, and the bread, still hours from baking, is already speaking. You sit near the door and close your eyes for a moment. The smell of yeast and ash drifts around you. A dog barks once more outside. Somewhere, a boy runs past, sandals slapping the dust, but inside only breathing, waiting, and dough. You stay near the doorway for a while, where the breeze slips in and stirs the flour resting in the folds of your tunic. You watch it lift, just slightly, before settling again. Even the wind respects the rhythm of this place. Nothing is rushed, not even the air. A young man enters the courtyard carrying a reed tray, balanced carefully on one hand. On it sit 6 small loaves, dark, domed, and each bearing a stamped seal pressed just before baking. The marks are sharp, clean, unmistakable, a cluster of lines that resembles a fish, a double crescent, a starburst, something that could be a bird's wing or a plow. He doesn't call out. He simply walks to the corner of the courtyard and sets the tray on a bench carved from packed clay. A woman meets him there. She lifts each loaf, inspects it briefly, then places it into separate baskets, one lined with linen, one with dried grass, and one with what looks like hardened palm fronds. You sit nearby and watch the transaction unfold in complete silence. Only the loaves speak. These are delivery breads. In ancient Mesopotamia, loaves traveled. They were baked in kitchens like this one, but they didn't always stay here. They moved across the city, from baker to clerk, from home to temple, from market stall to palace corridor, and because the written word could not ride along, bakers spoke through impressions, stamps, shapes, recipes held in form. A mainstream text, the administrative tablet of Driam, for example, lists daily rations in loaves, specific types for priests, for livestock handlers, for laborers. The quantity wasn't always adjusted, but the loaf type was. A herder might get 5 palm-sized discs, a temple guard, 3 heavier domed loaves with sesame pressed into the top. The shape was the message. The elder woman approaches the tray now and offers one of the stamped loaves to you. You turn it over. The seal is shallow, a kind of leaf or feather. The crust is darker than others you've seen. You lift it to your nose and smell something unfamiliar. Not fruit, not herbs, a kind of oil, maybe, or ash from a different fire. This loaf wasn't made here. It's from another kitchen, and yet it fits. It belongs. The woman watches your reaction and nods, almost to herself. The young man collects the empty tray and leaves without a word. No coin changes hands, but something of value passed between them. Loaves carry meaning beyond their weight. There's a fringe belief found in a partially translated letter from Lagash that suggests some households kept sample loaves, not for eating, but for reference, a kind of edible filing system. If a client requested a loaf like the one from Festival Week, the baker could pull the old one from a storage jar and match its shape. It was stale, of course, but the shape was true. You look at the stamped loaf again. It's still warm, still fragrant. You break a corner from the crust. It crumbles slightly, drier than the others, but inside it's dense, nutty, touched with something sour. It speaks of another hand, another fire, another method. The woman sets your half loaf beside a few others, collected throughout the morning. This is the tasting bench. You realize, a place not for meals, but for memory, to recall what's been made, to imagine what might be made next. An apprentice arrives, carrying a bundle of thin clay tablets, each no larger than your palm. She lays them out beside the loaves. Some are blank, others are marked with cuneiform, rows of stylus-pressed wedges, soft as river ripple. These are records, not of taxes, not of prayers, but of bread. Each tablet lists what was baked, how many, when, for whom. There's no poetry here, just tally marks, names, timestamps, and yet, these are the bones of a civilization. Bread shaped the Mesopotamian calendar. It structured days and weeks. It tied harvests to feasts. It determined wages. It traveled alongside soldiers. It was used to calculate rations, settle debts, bless marriages, and mark the dead. It was a language spoken not in words, but in weight and warmth. You lift one of the tablets. It's dry, brittle, but intact. The wedges are neat, purposeful. One line reads, roughly, 18 loaves, 3 marked, Temple East Gate, 3rd moon. You read it slowly, silently. The apprentice beside you does the same. She doesn't explain the tablet. She lets it speak for itself. A debate still lingers among historians. Were these tablets merely records, or were they something more? Some believe they functioned like contracts, guaranteeing delivery. Others think they were temporary, meant to be erased and reused. But a few believe that these bread tablets served a symbolic role, a memory kept not only for people, but for the gods. After all, if bread could speak for the living, could it not also speak for the divine? You set the tablet down, carefully, as though it might still be warm, behind you. Another batch of loaves emerges from the tanner. Their crusts are thicker, blistered. These are for market sale, you learn, to be wrapped in cloth and handed off by midday. You watch as a group of girls begin arranging them into baskets, Each loaf is inspected, turned, tapped. The hollow sound tells them it's done. No one announces that the work is finished. No one says we've done enough. They simply move with the rhythm of the bread itself. It tells them when. You glance at the sky. It's near midday now. The bread has spoken, and the kitchen listens. By midday, the shadows in the courtyard have shortened. The clay walls glow with stored warmth. Everything, the stones, the pots, the hands of the bakers, radiates a slow heat. You sit back on your heels, bread dust on your knees, and watch as the kitchen begins to shift again. It's not closing, not resting, it's turning. One of the apprentices, tall, quiet, eyes always searching, emerges from behind a partition, carrying a flat tray covered with cloth. She kneels beside a smooth clay board placed low to the ground and lifts the cloth. Beneath it lie small, pale discs. Some are round, some oval, and some, strangely, shaped like small birds. Fish, guti, or crescent moons. Each one is about the size of your palm. You've seen no bread like this today. These are festival breads. She says nothing as she begins to work, only gestures toward a jar of dates and a small pot of thick syrup resting nearby. Another girl joins her. Together, they begin to decorate the breads, pressing pieces of fruit into their centers, drawing lines with date syrup using wooden sticks sharpened to a point. This is no longer about efficiency. It's about intention. You lean closer and see that each bread is shaped with care. A bird loaf has an almond for an eye. The crescent-shaped ones are brushed with oil and scattered with caraway seeds. The oval loaves have small perforations, 7 dots arranged like stars. They look almost too delicate to eat. In ancient Mesopotamia, festival breads were baked for more than just consumption. They were symbolic, offered to gods, carried in processions, placed on family altars, or shared during seasonal feasts. The markings weren't random. A crescent loaf might honor Nana, the moon god. A fish shape might invoke fertility or river blessings. A bird for the skies, 7 dots for the 7 divine powers. You reach out, gently, and pick up a disc marked with a spiral. You can't tell whether it's a sun or a snake. Maybe it's both. You hold it lightly, sensing its fragility. The dough is soft, unbaked. It will go into the oven last, cooked fast, then cooled, then carried. One mainstream source, the Enuma Elish, describes ritual meals during major festivals, bread served not just to humans, but to deities through elaborate offerings. We don't know the exact recipes, but temple accounts list specialty flours, oils, and spices reserved only for these days. Some breads may have been enriched with clarified butter, others painted with minerals for color. A fringe text, recovered near Marie, describes a loaf baked with the likeness of stars and painted with the dust of red stone. Scholars have debated whether this refers to ochre or a now lost ingredient. What remains certain, these were not daily loaves. They were messages. Folded into dough, you ask the apprentice, quietly, where these loaves will go. She points to a basket lined with a greenish cloth and then nods toward the sky, an offering, a procession, or perhaps both. Some of these loaves won't be eaten at all. They'll be set on a stone slab outside the village temple, allowed to cool beneath the gaze of the god, and left for the birds or the wind to finish. The act of baking them is the offering, not their consumption. The festival breads go into the small side oven now. One by one, they bake quickly, their shapes warping slightly, their symbols softening but still clear. When they're pulled from the heat, they're laid out to cool beneath a thin reed mat that filters the sun. You watch as the apprentices sit back, quiet and still. One of them braids her own hair with flour-dusted fingers. Another rolls a date in her palm without eating it. These moments aren't idleness. They're part of the rhythm. You realize this is a pause, not a stop. The bread is still speaking. A boy arrives carrying a tablet. He hands it to the elder woman. She reads it without haste, then turns toward the loaves with stars and fish. She selects 5, wraps them gently in cloth, and ties the bundle with a length of twisted reed. Another delivery. This time, perhaps, to a shrine. You recall a line from a Sumerian hymn, one recorded on a temple tablet and often recited during festival days. The bread of the gods is shaped in silence. It's more than a metaphor here. You sit quietly as the apprentice offers you one of the cooled loaves, a crescent moon, flecked with seed. You hold it in your hands. The bread is still warm. It's not for eating, and yet you understand it. It tells a story with no title, marks time without a clock, says more than any inscription. It's soft in the center, cracked at the edge, still. The courtyard has taken on a golden hue, the kind that softens every edge, bricks, bread, faces, even time. You sit near the outer wall now, beside a tall basket woven from date palm fibers. Inside are loaves, not fresh ones, not warm. These are older, hardened, some broken, others shriveled to a third their original size. No one reaches for them to eat. Instead, a woman with streaks of flour on her forearms lifts one of the smallest, cups it in both hands, and turns toward the low gate that leads out of the kitchen. You follow at a respectful distance, sandals brushing dry dust. She walks through narrow alleyways, past shuttered storage rooms and quiet doorways, until she reaches a low stone structure tucked behind a barley field. It isn't a temple, nor a dwelling, just a 3-walled shelter with a clay platform and no roof. Vines climb its sides. A pot of water rests in one corner. This is not a shrine for a god. This is for the dead. She sets the bread on the platform, carefully, the same way one would set down a folded garment or a letter. Then she dips her fingers in the pot and sprinkles water over the stone. Nothing is said, not aloud. And then she walks away. You stay, watching. The breeze is still. The sun slips lower. This is the quietest act of the day. In ancient Mesopotamia, bread was not only for the living, it fed memory, spirit, legacy. Small loaves, sometimes no larger than a fist, were offered to deceased family members, placed at grave sites, doorways, or in alcoves near ancestral hearths. It wasn't superstition, it was continuity. Mainstream texts, including the Gilgamesh epic, reference the bread of the fathers, symbolic meals set out for the departed. In some versions, this bread ensures that the dead do not hunger. In others, it binds the living to their past, a contract renewed in silence. The loaves offered were rarely fresh. That wasn't the point. A stale loaf still spoke. In fact, some scholars argue it was preferred, enduring, not fleeting, a loaf made to last, not to tempt. The woman returns, passing you without speaking. She doesn't look back. You trail her as she re-enters the kitchen, where the energy has settled into that final phase of labor. Cleaning, covering, arranging, tools are rinsed and leaned against the wall. Ashes swept into small piles. Linen cloths, once damp with steam, now hang on pegs to dry. A boy enters with a tray of clay tablets. You recognize some, the record tablets from earlier. He begins stacking them in a niche carved into the wall. Some will be kept, others wiped clean and reused. The future must make room for itself. You approach one of the covered baskets and lift the edge of the cloth. Inside are loaves you helped make this morning, cracked, spotted, not perfect, but real. You feel the warmth has left them, but not the life. You're told these will be distributed tomorrow, some to households, some to workers in the field. Perhaps one will go with a child to school, another with a man who tracks water levels near the canal. You may never know, but the bread will carry your hands into the morning. A fringe discovery from a site near Nippur recorded a small tablet listing the names of bakers and where their loaves were delivered. Not notable, except for one detail beside each name. A single word, likely the customer's comment: soft, strong, ashy, honest. It reads like a quiet conversation between people who never met, told through flour and heat. You leave the basket undisturbed in the center of the courtyard. The hearth is being doused, not with water, never with water, but with ash. New ash over old. It smothers the embers gently, preserving the heat without ending it. Tomorrow, the fire will begin again from what remains today. You sit beside it and press your palm to the stone. It's warm, and beneath the warmth, something deeper time. The sun is low now. Light seeps sideways into the courtyard. Faces are golden. The floor is striped with shadow. No one calls the day complete. It simply is. You rise slowly, moving toward the corner where the discarded loaves had waited. One remains, small, misshapen. You pick it up. Its weight is surprisingly even, its surface dry, but not brittle. You hold it close and sense a faint smell of barley, still clinging beneath the ash. You do not eat it. You carry it, not for hunger, but for memory. The last of the loaves have cooled. The last of the tools have been washed. The air itself has shifted, lighter now, but not yet released from its duties. The kitchen doesn't sleep, exactly. It rests. You do too, seated beneath an overhanging reed canopy near the outer wall, where a few older loaves rest in a basket, too cracked for delivery, too warm for disposal. A boy approaches, barefoot, hair full of dust. He's carrying a tray, nothing elaborate, just a slab of wood with 3 stacked loaves and a folded slip of parchment. He nods at the elder woman and sets it down on the edge of the courtyard wall. You trail him, not closely, but enough to follow. He walks barefoot across narrow lanes that twist between mud brick houses, past sleeping goats, quiet alleyways, and a wall carved with the faint outline of a god's symbol, one you've seen marked on bread that morning. He walks quickly, but without rush, balanced. You can tell he's done this many times before. This is not just delivery, it's circulation. He's the link between kitchen and city, between flour and need, in ancient Mesopotamia. Bread delivery was common and expected. It wasn't just bought at market, it was brought to temples, to scribes, to guards, to architects recording irrigation levels. Bread was carried through streets long before coins were exchanged or taxes filed. It was the first transaction, the first form of trust. You watch as the boy ducks into a small covered entryway. He emerges empty-handed. The tray stays behind. Nothing is signed, nothing exchanged. The bread itself was both message and receipt, a mainstream set of tablets from the city of Umma details the daily flow of food between kitchens and public buildings. Loaves are listed by type, count, destination. But what stands out is not the quantity, it's the frequency. Every day, every morning. A city sustained by grain and footsteps. You return to the kitchen slowly. The sun now leans low on the horizon. Shadows stretch long and lazy across the courtyard. The heat from the clay walls lingers. But the breeze has returned, whispering past linen cloths, lifting loose husks, spinning a single flake of ash in the air like a lost feather. Someone in the courtyard begins gathering unused flour into a clay jar. Not a chore, a gesture. Leftover grain is not discarded. It becomes the first offering for tomorrow. Nearby, another apprentice begins stacking firewood, arranging the lengths carefully by thickness and length. She does it by feel, not instruction. Some sticks were cut this morning. Others look older, grayed by sun and use. You've learned now the fire's quality. Tomorrow depends on how it is remembered today. There's a line recorded in a poem attributed to the court of The loaf is carried before the sun, but shaped in the breath of yesterday. No one knows who wrote it, or if it was meant to be remembered. But here, in this courtyard, it feels like truth. You kneel again beside the hearth. The ash from earlier still glows faintly beneath the top layer. You reach toward it with the paddle you used that morning. The edge is warm. The wood no longer smooth. It holds a faint crack now, invisible unless you're looking for it. A mark left by heat and learning. You place it gently against the wall. It belongs here now. A girl approaches with a folded cloth and hands it to you. Inside is a single loaf, still warm, though not hot, unmarked, plain. This one was not meant for offering, or accounting, or gift. It's for you. There's no fanfare, no nod. But when she walks away, she leaves behind the space that welcomes your presence. The bread is heavy in your palm, denser than expected. When you bring it near, you catch the scent roasted barley, a hint of date, maybe even a whisper of ash. You don't eat it, not yet, because carrying it feels more important. You sit in the doorway, watching the light bleed across the clay floor, watching as the women fold cloths and tuck pots beneath benches, as the tools return to their shadows, as the embers soften, and then quietly, a sound, barely a whisper, not words, just the call of an evening bird, a low coo, far away. It's not echoed, not answered, and yet. The courtyard seems to respond. Everyone moves a little slower, a little more deliberately. You turn the loaf over in your hands. Its bottom is scored with the lines of the baking stone. Its top is cracked slightly from cooling. It's still giving up heat, quietly, as if it were telling its story in the only language it knows. And you're still listening. Evening arrives not with ceremony, but with certainty. No sudden bells, no shouted calls, just a subtle shift in the way light moves, sideways now, not down, and how everyone begins to stand a little longer in silence before reaching for the next task. You sit near the courtyard's edge, loaf still warm in your hand. The heat has faded slightly, but the center remains soft. The smell of barley still clings to its crust. You press your fingers into its edge and feel the faint spring. You could eat it now, but you don't. Someone approaches from the side, a man, older than most you've seen today. His robe is frayed, marked with small, ash-colored patches. His hands are large, calloused. You recognize him as one of the bakers who worked by the inner hearth. He doesn't speak to you. Instead, he lowers himself to a bench and begins to unwrap a small bundle at his side. Inside it, a tablet, not clay, a flat slab of bread, hardened completely, as thin as your hand, and marked all over with indentations, little lines, dots, crosses. He sets it on his lap and begins tapping it gently with a stick. It takes you a moment to understand what you're seeing. This is not food. This is a record. Bakers in ancient Mesopotamia had more than ledgers and seals. Sometimes they used bread itself as archive, stamped loaves, not for eating, but for remembering, a rare practice, and still debated among scholars. Some believe it was symbolic, a way to feed information to the temple. Others argue it was functional, durable. If you had no clay, no stylus, no time, you used what you had. The man taps one spot, then another, perhaps recounting deliveries, perhaps checking something against memory. When he finishes, he wraps the loaf again and places it in a shallow pit at the base of the courtyard wall. You peer closer. Several bundles lie there, some marked with cords, others tied in reeds. This is a memory wall, not for stories, for systems. Tomorrow, one of the apprentices will retrieve the tablet and interpret its marks. Bake a new batch based on its contents. The bread will become numbers again. Numbers will become loaves. And so, it continues. You rise and walk slowly to another corner of the courtyard, where a young girl sits grinding grain alone. The motion is quiet, rhythmic. Her stone sings a soft, gritty tune against the saddle quern. She looks tired, but not weary. She grinds because she knows the morning will need flour. You offer to help. She nods. You sit beside her, press your palms against the grinding stone, and begin the slow motion, back and forth, back and forth. You feel the weight in your shoulders. You feel the breath steady in your chest. It is not fast work. It is not creative. It is maintenance. And yet it binds you to every hand that ever made bread before you. In ancient kitchens, grinding was often the task of the young, the apprentices, the enslaved, the daughters, and yet it was the most essential part. Without flour, there is no bread. Without that coarse dust, there is no temple ration, no offering, no archive, just hunger. Mainstream interpretations of Mesopotamian labor systems sometimes downplay these smaller roles. The names on tablets are often male, the titles grand, but the bread itself, the substance of daily life, was made by everyone, especially those never recorded. A fringe inscription, found etched into a cracked stair tile in a small bakery ruin near Kish, reads, "I grind, I do not speak," but the bread does. The author is unknown, the context unclear, but it has been preserved in at least 2 academic papers, cited as rare proof that even the smallest tasks held voice. You look down at your hands, pale with flour now. The sun is dipping behind the wall. Shadows stretch long across the courtyard. Still, you grind. The girl beside you hums. It's not a tune, just a note. Low, steady. It keeps time with her breath, with the stone, with the day. No one tells her to stop. This kitchen doesn't reject sound. It just waits until sound knows its place. Eventually, you stop grinding. The flour is gathered into a clay jar. The stone is brushed clean. You rise, shoulders warm, and return to the hearth one last time. There, where the first loaves were shaped, someone has lit a single oil lamp. It flickers, casting long shadows across the stones. Not enough light to work by, just enough to remember what work was done. You sit on the edge of the hearth, your earlier loaf still in hand. The crust has cooled, the scent has faded, but the weight remains. You press it to your chest, just briefly, and close your eyes. Somewhere, someone speaks your name, softly. You do not open your eyes, because you already know what it means. The lamp near the hearth burns low now, its small flame wobbling slightly, as if even it were tiring from the day. Around it, the courtyard holds still, not silent, but heavy with the kind of stillness that settles in only when everything has been done. You remain seated, your back to the wall, the loaf now resting on your knees like a message not yet opened. Across from you, two apprentices sweep the last of the flour from the corners, careful not to disturb the ash pit. The embers there are still faintly alive. They won't be extinguished, not completely, just blanketed in the ash of other fires, one life making room for the next. A tall jar near the doorway catches your eye. You hadn't noticed it before. It's sealed with a flat piece of clay stamped with a simple pattern, a triangle pressed into a grid. A woman nearby notices your gaze and nods. You rise and walk to it. She removes the seal and lifts the lid with care. Inside bread, but not like the others. These loaves are older, drier, pale from age. They're not for eating, and not for memory either. They're for calculation. In Mesopotamian cities, bread was more than nourishment, it was math. Loaves were used as units of exchange, as measures of labor. A brickmaker's day might be worth 5 loaves, a temple guard 7, a singer at a festival 10. The bread itself was rarely delivered, but the promise of it was recorded and honored. This jar contains models, reference loaves, each one made to a specific weight, shape, and density, not to be eaten, but to compare future batches. A kind of edible standard. If your loaf didn't match, it didn't count. A mainstream tablet from the city of Lagash lists over 40 types of bread, each with its own name, size, and purpose. Some were flat, some domed, some mixed with oil, others dried for storage. The sheer variety reflects a civilization that understood its people not just by what they ate, but how, and when, and why. The woman selects one of the loaves from the jar. She taps its side lightly, listening for hollowness, for weight. Then she sets it beside the sealed lid and replaces the cover. The model loaf stays out. It will be used tomorrow, not as food, but as a reminder. You touch its surface. It's cool, hard, more artifact than meal. A fringe theory, proposed by a historian with a fondness for cross-disciplinary speculation, suggests that these reference loaves weren't just about consistency. They were a form of ethical practice, a way for bakers to hold themselves accountable if a promised loaf fell short. It wasn't only the worker who suffered, it was the baker who failed the bread. Then was a kind of contract, one that didn't need to be signed, just baked, back in the courtyard. The apprentices begin packing up the tools, brushing flour from the grooves in the mortar, wrapping clay molds in worn linen, bundling the reeds used to stamp designs. Each movement is slow, not rushed, not delayed, just enough. One apprentice carries a tray with tomorrow's dough, not yet risen, not yet ready. She places it near the hearth, where the embers will keep it warm through the night. A bowl of water sits beside it, just in case you sit again, the loaf still warm against your thigh. It hasn't left your hands all day, except when someone placed another in them. A gift, a reply. It's strange, this bread, so heavy with meaning, so quiet in purpose. You think back over the morning's loaves, the ones pressed into bird shapes, marked for temples, broken for ancestors, the ones stacked in baskets for field workers, the ones turned to tablets. You realize you've barely eaten, but you're not hungry, because in this place, bread doesn't just fill the body, it explains the world. There's a word in Akkadian Ninda. It means bread, but it also means portion, ration, what is due. The same word appears in both prayer tablets and payment records. It fed the gods, it paid the guards, it settled debts, it stills the mind. You press your palm lightly to your loaf and feel the ridges formed by the fire brick beneath it. Tiny cracks spider out from its center. It's no longer warm, but it holds the heat of something older. A voice nearby murmurs a line you can't quite catch. Then another, a quiet chant, spoken more to the bread than to the room. It's not a ritual, not a performance, just practice, a few words repeated to close the day. You close your eyes, repeat them silently, not because you understand them, but because you want to, because this bread speaks in shapes, in heat, in hush, and somehow in carrying it. You have learned to listen. The courtyard is quiet now, not because it is empty, but because everything that could be said has already been shaped and baked and placed gently aside. You remain on the smooth stone bench near the hearth, the once warm loaf still resting in your lap. Its weight has become familiar, its crust no longer firm but gently giving, softened by time and touch. From behind the outer partition, footsteps sound, bare, slow, deliberate. A man steps into the courtyard. He's older than anyone else you've seen today. His robe is sun-faded, and he carries nothing but a walking staff and a folded piece of linen cradled in one arm. The apprentices nod as he passes, but no one speaks. He's not a master baker, not a priest, but everyone makes space for him. You do too. He takes a seat opposite you, unwraps the cloth, and reveals a loaf. It's not new. It's dark, nearly black at the edges. Its surface bears cracks that run deep, and in its center is a single pressed mark, a spiral surrounded by 3 dots. You've seen that mark once before, earlier in the day, pressed into a festival loaf. But this one is different. It's older, or drier, preserved. The man lays it gently on the ground between you. This is not bread for eating, not bread for record. This is memory. In some parts of ancient Mesopotamia, families kept ceremonial loaves as tokens of life events, births, initiations, even dreams that felt important enough to bake. They were not idolized, they were not worshipped, but they were kept, because words fade, and flour, if treated correctly, endures. Mainstream records say little about this practice. It's not part of the temple accounts or ration tablets. But fringe researchers, especially those studying domestic shrines and burial goods, have noted these hardened loaves buried in shallow pots or sealed in wall niches. Their surfaces marked but unnamed, a whisper of a moment that someone once wanted to keep. The man doesn't speak to explain the loaf. He doesn't offer its story. Instead, he breaks off a small piece and places it beside him, not as an invitation, as an offering. You follow without instruction. Tear a crumb from your own bread and set it next to his. The loaves sit quietly together. The act is simple, unadorned, but you can feel its weight. This is what bread can do when the scribes are gone, when the records crumble, when the chants fade. Bread remembers. He wraps his loaf again, more gently than before, and places it beside him. Across the courtyard, a girl hums. She's sweeping slowly, reed brush moving in tight arcs across the clay. The sound isn't a song, not even a melody, just breath with rhythm. It carries no words, but it sets a pace for the end of the day. You stand now and cross toward a part of the kitchen you've passed a dozen times today but never entered, a small alcove, curtained by rough linen, lit by a single, low-burning lamp. Inside, there are shelves. Each one holds something different. A clay pot sealed with wax, a basket of dried herbs, a stack of fire-blackened tiles, and on the highest shelf, resting in a shallow clay bowl, is a loaf. At first you think it's ordinary, but then you look closer. It's imprinted with letters, not stamped symbols or decorative marks, but characters, cuneiform, pressed by stylus into the surface before baking. The text spirals inward, wrapping the crust like a scroll. You don't touch it. It's not meant to be handled, but you read what you can. The markings are faint, but a few words emerge: harvest, moon, blessing, barley, third gate. It's not a recipe, it's a story. In rare cases, particularly among scribes who also maintained temple kitchens, loaves were used as vessels for temporary texts, blessings, prophecies, oaths. The bread was then burned, buried, or broken ceremonially. But sometimes they weren't destroyed. Sometimes they were kept, not as food, as archive. You wonder who baked this one and why it was spared. You step back from the shelf. The man who brought the blackened loaf is gone now. No one saw him leave, but his offering remains. So does yours. You sit again by the hearth, and for the first time all day, you break the bread in your hands. Not all of it, just enough. The crust gives way easily. The center is tender. The scent of barley and ash rises again. You place one piece in your mouth. It's simple, dry, slightly sour, 1,000 years of repetition packed into one quiet bite. And now you know what it means to eat something shaped by memory. This bread isn't delicious. It doesn't need to be. It's true. You eat slowly, and only a little, enough to understand, enough to remember. And as the last light leans long across the floor, the quiet does not deepen. It just settles, like flour. You remain seated as dusk gathers fully, the last threads of gold fading into the corners of the courtyard and drawing out the shadows in long, hushed strokes. The lamp near the hearth flickers now with uncertainty. The oil is nearly spent. and the space you've shared with flour and fire and figures in silence begins to shift into something softer, less work, more waiting. The apprentices begin to leave, not in a rush, not in a line, just gradually, peeling off like leaves from a tree when the wind decides they're ready. One brushes flour from her hands and folds a cloth over the unfinished dough for tomorrow. Another leans a paddle against the far wall, carefully, like laying down a thought. One stops by the door, glances back once, then slips out. No words, no goodbyes, just the last exhale of the kitchen. You remain. So does the elder woman. She moves more slowly now, her tasks less about labor, more about ritual. She circles the hearth once, gathering small things, a broken reed brush, a handful of scorched husks, a lump of hardened flour from under a bench. Nothing useful, nothing pretty, but nothing is discarded. She places them in a low bowl, sets the bowl in the far corner near the wall niche, and covers it with a square of cloth. It is a gesture of closing, one that does not end the day, but respects it. In ancient Mesopotamian households, it's believed that some kitchens maintained private corners, not just for storage, but for observance, not shrines exactly, not temples, but places where the invisible forces of the home, heat, grain, time, were acknowledged, tended to, fed, even, not for magic, for balance. A mainstream account of daily life in Nippur describes such a space, a quiet place in the cooking yard, near the old bricks, where offerings of breadcrumbs and smoke were left not for gods, but for what listens. You now understand what that means. The woman motions for you to follow. You rise, still holding the remains of your loaf. She leads you to the very edge of the courtyard, through a narrow corridor lined with stacked reed mats and discarded grinding stones. You pass through an open gate into a smaller space, barely more than an alcove between walls. The sky above is fully dark. A single star has appeared. She kneels. You do the same. Before her lies a flat slab of stone. She sets down a round piece of dough, raw, unmarked, plain. Then she breaks a corner from it, just as you did earlier with your loaf, and places the fragment on the stone. She waits, not for a response, just for stillness. Then, without speaking, she nods toward your bread. You break a piece, smaller this time, and do the same. The stone accepts it, doesn't move, doesn't glow, doesn't reply. But something has been answered. Some fringe texts from private letters in Sipper and Marie describe these moments, not formally, not liturgically, but casually. Bread left for the space. One note reads, "Another crumb placed where grandmother taught me to shape loaves." These were not acts of worship. They were acts of return. You give a little back. You let the kitchen breathe. You rise and follow the woman as she walks back into the courtyard. She pours a small cup of water, not to drink, but to rinse the hearthstone, just a circle around its edge, like cleaning a wound that never bled. The kitchen is finished, but it will begin again. You return to your bench, the bread still resting beside you. There is only a portion left now, enough for the morning, perhaps enough for someone else. You remember a line from an ancient ode found etched into a bakery floor tile when the oven cools. The bread speaks louder. The lamp goes out. No one relights it. You sit in the dark, yes, and the air smells of flour and coal and something older. Not memory, not time, just the exact shape of a day. You close your eyes, and though no one speaks, you feel the kitchen say goodbye in the stillness, in the warmth still trapped in the walls, in the place your hand rests beside a loaf that no longer asks to be eaten, only remembered. The stars are sharp above you now, scattered across the night like seeds over tilled earth. The courtyard is empty. Even the coals beneath the hearth no longer glow, just a nest of gray, soft as old linen. You remain, your hands folded over the last of the day's bread. Around you, the kitchen sleeps, but you do not leave. You stay because there is one more journey left to make. You rise slowly, your knees stiff, the edges of your tunic lightly dusted with flour. The bread in your hands is small now, wrapped in cloth not for warmth, but for the quiet dignity of carrying something unfinished. You step through the low gate and walk past the walls that kept the morning close, past the stack of reed mats, the silent paddle, the cooling stones. You walk out into the night. The path leads you toward the river. Its banks are low this time of year, the reeds hushed in the dark, the water moving without urgency. There's no moon yet, but the stars offer enough light to follow the trail worn by bare feet, baskets, and wheels. You pass fig trees, heavy with fruit that hasn't yet fallen, and the air smells of silt and clay. You reach a bend where the stones have been gathered into a low platform. It is neither altar nor pier, just a place that has seen its share of waiting. You sit, and from your cloth you unwrap the bread. Its crust is thin now, a little cracked. It has cooled completely, but it still remembers heat here, beside the river. You break the loaf in two. You eat one half slowly. The taste is simpler now, not just grain and ash, but something quieter, something shaped by everything that came before the grinding, the kneading, the waiting, the sealing, the silence. The second half you leave beside you, folded once in the cloth and set gently on the stone, not as an offering, not as a gift, but as proof that you were here. In ancient Mesopotamian cities, rivers were more than water. They were calendars, messengers, witnesses, and bread, which traveled through every aspect of life, from harvest to hunger to record to rest, was often left by the water's edge, not for fish, not for gods, but for time itself. One obscure account from a scribe's log in Larsa records a portion left at the bend, for what may pass, nothing more. You sit beside the second half, letting the sounds of water and wind fill the air once occupied by fire and breath. The cloth lifts slightly in the breeze, then settles again. You close your eyes. The loaf does not speak. It does not need to. And now, with the oven cool and the last of the bread resting where the river can see it, there is nothing left to do. Let your breath slow, matching the gentle rhythm of the water. Let your hands relax, just as the flour settled at the end of the day. You've walked through the quiet work of a Mesopotamian kitchen, not to learn its recipes, but to feel its rhythm, its pace, its attention to every small motion. And now, as night folds itself gently across the city, you're allowed to let go of your own weight. No more dough to knead, no more fire to tend, only rest. Imagine the warmth still stored in the bricks, the softness of woven mats, the flour lingering on fingertips that now lie open. empty of tools. You are no longer holding anything, and nothing is holding you. The bread you shaped today may be gone by morning, carried, crumbled, eaten, or remembered. But the stillness you learned in making it, that stays with you, let it wrap around your shoulders. Let it fill the space between thoughts. Let it quiet the last echoes of the day. And if dreams come, let them come like loaves from a hearth, slow, warm, simple. You don't need to understand them. Only carry them gently, like bread, like silence, like breath.